Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Viking Academy podcast. Today on the podcast, I had the luxury of interviewing Krista Clive-Smith. Now, Krista is a serial social entrepreneur, and she was a pioneer of personal branding. Now, you'll find out very quickly she doesn't like that phrase because there's a lot of negative connotations with that in terms of, oh, personal branding, Tony Robbins, blah, blah, blah. That's not what we get into. What we get into is the concept that she says is she believes that your personal brand, who you are, is the business model of the future. When we talk the business model of the future, we're talking about the value that you're here to bring into the world. So whether you have a business or not, this podcast is for you. It is so in alignment with the Viking Academy ethos that I kind of bounce up and down as we start exploring and discovering new connections between what she's doing in the personal branding space and what I've been talking about in the Viking Academy, which is that the universe made every single one of us for a reason, but we're the only species on the planet that don't know why we're here. So our job is to go explore ourselves, discover who we are so that we can have the adventure of our life. We could have gone on for a couple hours, but we don't. It's a normal length podcast on this one, but hopefully we'll get her back on the podcast again in the future. But there is a lot here, a lot of information in here. There's a really simplified thinking tool to figure out and get you to think about what is your unique ability? What are you here to do on this planet? Why did the creator make you? And when you start finding that, my experience is when you start finding it, you will light up with passion and purpose, and life becomes an incredible treasure hunt. Krista will tell you a little bit more about that in the podcast as we go. So there you go. Krista Clive-Smith coming up. Let's go explore. We could go down so many different rabbit holes and talk about so many different things. You've had a chance to ruminate on the Viking Academy, and we've had lots of conversations around personal branding, life choices, traveling. You've done the nomad thing. Where do you want to explore in this podcast?
Well, as much as I don't love calling it personal branding because it creates a lot of associations in people's minds that for me are not quite accurate or true, I think that the greatest opportunity in front of every single human being on this planet is to figure out who they are, really who they are, what they're here to do, the value they're here to add, because that is their superpower. And so that is ultimately what your personal brand is. When you think about who you are, what you know, what you do, and your mindset, attitudes, and beliefs through which you deliver them, that is your personal brand. It just happens to be, when you think of the word personal brand, it kind of gives most people an image of Tony Robbins or somebody like, Tarzaning on a stage saying, look at me, look at me. It's not that at all.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I think we should go there.
And that's where I wanted to go. For the listener and the watcher here is Krista and I had already done 2 podcasts for my other podcast, the MBA Way, which is for the entrepreneurs. And I was like, we went down into quite a deep level when it came to, and again, I don't know what else you want to call it, personal branding. I think you need a new phrase for it. But this, what you just articulated there is the essence of the Viking Academy, which is, I truly believe we're all made, universe made us all for a reason, but we're the only species on the planet that don't know why we're here. So our job from the minute we're born to the day that we die is to figure out who we are and what we're here to do. Like, we're constantly trying to figure that out. Like, animals just do what they do. They know why they're here, but humans, we don't. And I think that's where the adventure is. That's where the fun is. Like, that's the excitement for me. It's like, oh, I just found out something new about myself that people actually find valuable. And if I spend more time doing that, people love it and I get more energy from it. And this is that unique ability that we talk about in Strategic Coach, which you and I are both, that's where we met, is through Strategic Coach. And so but you've gone so much deeper into this personal identity. You see, I'm trying to figure out a different phrase of it instead of personal branding, but figuring out who the hell you are, that I had to share it. So maybe give us a little background on what you stumbled into, like how you got into this in the first place. And then we'll come forward.
Yeah, sure. I'll try and give you the quickest route through that. So my first company that was the MBA I never got at school was a professional organizing company that I franchised. And in our Vancouver location, we had this client. Actually, you know what? That's a lie. It wasn't. It was in Kelowna. This client, when she was never in the space when we were organizing, and we kept unearthing all of these antique cameras throughout her space. And they'd be in the strangest places, under a kitchen sink, in a bathroom cupboard, all over the place. And because she wasn't there, we couldn't ask what the story was. Yet the pattern was so significant, I couldn't let it go. So what we did is we bought some floating shelves and we created this vignette with all these antique cameras and this beautiful couple of antique photographs we found in the space. As she walked in and saw it and burst into tears, I said, "Where did you get these cameras?" And we're like, no, they're yours. She's like, "I don't own a single camera." Actually, you do. You own a lot of them. And that moment where she got to see her true self through the eyes of another put up onto a wall was so profound that she ended up quitting her job and becoming a photographer. And in that moment, she realized part of who she was and what she was here to do. And that rattled me to the core. And that's when I went on to write the book on personal branding. This was back in 2003. So, I mean, people thought I was an absolute lunatic. I'm like, no, it's a business model of the future. But social media wasn't even invented to the same way we know it today. There was like MySpace for underground bands, but it wasn't really a thing. And so what I realized when our teams were in spaces, organizing people's homes and offices, is that the real them, the authentic person that lives inside of each of us, actually was very present in their space, but they could never see it. So then I went on a quest to figure out how I could create tools and frameworks and exercises to help get people closer to the answer so that they actually had some ways of getting there. And that's been predominantly my life's work ever since.
I love that because I have a quote on the Viking Academy website. It's, "Who you are is screaming so loudly, I can't hear a word you're saying." You know what I mean?
Exactly.
It's like who the person is and who people are is so obvious to everybody but them. Like,
yes.
Everybody knows who you are except for you, which is crazy when you think about it. It's like you think it's like you're so close to yourself, you can't even see who you are.
Yes, I call that the red light syndrome. So imagine that you have a red light strapped to your forehead, and everywhere you go, you walk into a room and all of a sudden everyone's like, "Jesus, it's really red in here right now." And you're like, "Red? What's red?" Because you actually it's so a part of you that you can't even contextually understand what it is. And so what's beautiful about that, though, is that whether you call it God, universe, source, spirit, whatever you call it, left clues. So when we entered this body in this lifetime, there's this treasure map of clues that's inherent in who we are that is so exciting that once you actually realize you're in possession of the map and you can go forth experimenting in life, you're unburying and uncovering this treasure and discovering new things throughout your lifetime. It is the most exciting journey and ride. What an epic thing to be alive.
Yes. All of the above. That's why this is exactly why I started the Viking Academy, is to help people embrace the adventure. And the adventure comes from exploring and discovering parts of yourself, and not knowing what it is and discovering it is the adventure. That is the call to adventure. Is, if you knew what the answer was, if you knew what it was, where would the fun be in that? Like, how would you, like, what's the point? So it's in the not knowing, in the exploring and the discovering is where the adventure and the fun happens.
Exactly. And the more real you get, the more authentic and raw, the more that it starts to show you, which is so hysterical because, it's so counterintuitive. I love the cosmic joke. The first half of our lives, we try to, try to fit in. And the last half, we try to stand out. So it's like, oh, if somebody would have just let us know when we were kids, just skip that whole first part. Just go to harnessing and using your uniqueness as your superpower. And then as you dive into that, it's just like this sinkhole that just has no bottom and you learn more and new things. Yet when you go down the hole of trying to be someone you're not, you hit dead ends left, right, and center.
Yes. Yes to all the above. That something you said at the beginning of this, and I just want to highlight this for the listeners and the watchers, those that are watching the video, is that you said this personal branding is the business model of the future. And that's something, I think that was one of the last things you shared with me on the other podcast that really just a light bulb went off. And I was like, not just the business model of the future, it is. And when we're talking about business owners, I want those listeners that aren't business owners, don't have their own business. This is the value you bring to the world. So think of yourself as the business, and you're the one bringing that value to the world. Figuring out who you are is the value model of the future. So individuality and individual expression is the model that we are moving in towards, albeit
Correct.
very chunky and grindy and filled with adversarial crunchiness, because we're trying to break out of an old 3-dimensional model to open up into that 5th dimension where it's more open and expressive. So we're having a bumpy ride right now, but for those of you that are listening, this is about you finding out who you are, which opens up the joy, which opens up the value that you are here to create.
Yes. And by you feeling liberated and empowered to express fully at the highest and best level you're able to, it unconsciously gives people permission to do the same. And so, you dimming your light, it doesn't make anybody else shine brighter. It just makes you dim. And when you shine brightly, you brighten up a space that people are like, oh, I could do that too, which then helps them crank it up. If you put a candle in front of the sun, neither light is diminished. They're just different.
And it becomes even brighter. It's, I see that when, I see Dan Sullivan, our coach, and he's all about creating more and more freedom for himself and to express who he is. And he wants all of us to have more ability, to have more freedom to be ourselves. And that's infectious when you're around someone who's excited to see you be more of you. Who doesn't want that? You know what I mean? And I say, I really notice this too. So our daughters are the same age, right? I see Isla, when I let her be herself and I support it and embrace it and celebrate it, she starts flowering even more. But the minute you start telling them to be something they're not, they start to shrink, and then it becomes control and command. It's a horrible, sticky thing, and the kids will fight back, right? They just totally fight back. And I think I look at us as a human race, we're all just kids trying to get back to that playful child within ourselves. Imagine, like you said, if we could unlock that earlier so that they don't have to go through the whole pretending to be someone they're not.
And really looking through your everyday life, looking through the activities and going through your calendar and asking, okay, when I'm doing this activity, how do I feel? Do I feel constrained? That, when you were talking about how she feels when she's being told what to do and squashed, there's a compression that happens versus when you're alive and doing what you want, there's an expansion that occurs. So when you think about performance art, right, whether it's dance or a competitive figure skater for 19 years, whenever you're in performance art, it needs room to move. And that room, that freedom is part of the energy of creation. So thinking about your activities day to day, is it expansive? Is it creative? Is there freedom, or is it constricting? And really trying to figure out, how can I get out of the things that are constricting, or morph and change them so that I have more of the creative expansion feeling? There's so many people that are trapped in jobs that they absolutely hate, for example, or relationships, or you name it. Well, that's just another form of that constriction. So rather than just trying to fight the battle externally, start bringing the battle inside to say, okay, who do I need to be more authentically to show up at a job I hate, or in a relationship? Like, have the courage to be more of yourself, and you start to watch the world around you change. It's magic.
I have a question about raising a child, since we have the same age. How do you balance between giving them that creative expression and wanting them and celebrating and motivating them to be themselves with, hey, you got to do your math homework? Because we're having a battle right now about math. Math is a major battle. She's not following, and the schools are just pushing her through. Like, they're not even holding her back. They're just like, oh yeah, she's fine with math. And then we find out she's like 3 years behind or some crazy thing like that. And she hates math, doesn't have any interest in it. Hates school, doesn't want to be around it. How do you balance being the parent and saying, I need to help them with this for future, like, and have them finish their schooling, shall we say, versus letting them have that creative, expressive self? Because they are still kids. Do you know what I mean? And so, like, how do you balance that? Because I'm having a fuck of a time with it.
Totally. And I think that's one of the cool things about parenting, right? Is it's another one of those puzzles that we're constructing and doing, and we've never seen what the picture on the box, and there's no real like book or manual. So a couple of different things is, I would look to her intrinsic motivation. So what fires her up and what gets her motivated, and how is she motivated? Because there's some little hacks for especially the preteen that I've actually learned in some parenting books that I've read, which is, for example, when you come home at the end of the day, you create one time what's called the freedom list, which is putting away your backpack, taking out your lunch kit, doing your homework, whatever, which once that list is accomplished, that gives you freedom. So rather than saying, have you done your homework? Have you done all the things? You just say, oh, do you have your freedom yet?
Have you completed your freedom list?
Well, or do you have freedom yet? Because you don't have freedom until you do what you need to do. So the list becomes just, the check kind of on the wall. But the real thing that they want is the freedom. So freedom lives on the other side of the list, right? So that would be one thing. But also sometimes, and again, this is like how we beat ourselves up. I was actually not good at math myself. So I really empathize with where she's at. One, I had a mentor as an adult. This was when I had the organizing company, and we got talking, and I shared a limiting belief and a negative belief that I had about myself being bad at math. He's like, I don't think you're bad at math. Are you bad at math? I said, yeah, I had such a hard time. And we deconstructed it. And guess what we figured out? I must have been away the day they did 7+5 and 8+5 at school. That actually created this whole label of self-esteem. And so when I said to him, well, how do you do 7+5? He's like, 5+5+2. I'm like, what? It's a 2-step equation? You've got to be kidding me. And so then he goes home that night to his family at the dinner table, and he's recounting our conversation. So then he says to his family, how do you do 7+5? He got 3 different answers. So then he did a Survey Monkey poll. I mean, God bless this guy. He's a data geek just like I am. And it turns out most people don't do it in a consistent way, but it's consistently a 2-step equation. once I understood that and freed myself from the belief system, math was never a problem. But I also never understood how math applied. So being able to have somebody like a mentor, or your case as a parent, whatever they've taught in math, applying it to the real world. And there's this genius thing called YouTube University, where so many rock star teachers have actually found ways to show you what algebra looks like in the real world, to do the applied knowledge. Motivation changes when I can see why it matters. So, Simon Sinek, start with why. That matters in parenting. It matters for our kids, because if they can't see why, they don't want to do it either. It's compressed. It's not expansive and creative and fun.
This is why I love having these podcasts. Is what you just shared with me opened up a connection for me. And I just thought of something about treating my relationship with my daughter as an exploration into who she is and discovering what helps her tick and helps her motivate, instead of, and the same way I do for myself. So instead of being, because I personally flip flop. I go from, I'm old school European, first generation Canadian, or European descent or Norwegian descent, first year or first generation Canadian. I flip flop to go to the old school. Just do your homework. And then I'm like,
Sure.
no, I want to understand it. But that whole reframe there was like, why don't I explore this like I'm exploring my own mind, body, and spirit? Why don't I go, let's discover how Isla ticks. Let's discover what makes her light up. Let's discover the way her brain works, and just treat it like the jigsaw
Parenting
puzzle
adventure.
the parenting adventure. That's what it is.
It is, because it's as much the psychology for you being able to parent her effectively that gets the result that you want for her but doing it her way. And that's the art and science of this thing, which is why I love all these things. They're kind of like golf to me, because golf, it doesn't matter how good you get playing the game. You take that next shot and you're like, come on, shouldn't I be better by now? Like, then you shank it. And even the pros do it, right? And so this is parenting, living, figuring out who we are. All of these things are these beautiful quests that are these adventures that will never it'll always be a new problem to solve throughout our lifetime.
Yeah. Yeah. I think my life is more enjoyable than golf, because I called golf the game of whack fuck, because all you hear is whack and then fuck, whack. It's like, what is this supposed to be fun? Like, you hit the ball every time. The guy, especially I was golfing with this one business partner, every time he hit it, he'd fuck, and he'd slam the club down, and I'm looking at him going, is this fun for you? Like, really?
That doesn't sound like he's having any fun, versus the adventure of like, wow, okay, how is that possible? I just hit that shot. I just hit, even if you're like a 4 handicap, how is that possible that I just hit that shot?
Yeah. Well, this is, and it's finding that energetic center of life that stimulates us to activity, that stimulates us to move forward. That's not it's not force. It's power versus force. I was talking about this book, Power versus Force. And the difference between powering through or forcing things and having the power. And when you're drawn to something, there's a powerful surge as opposed to someone forcing you to do it. Right. And so thank you so much. That totally reframed my relationship with my daughter. That was huge.
And
huge,
coming
Krista.
at it with a spirit of curiosity versus judgment, and I think that's the thing in life, to be able to go through with curiosity, to be like, okay, why don't I like that? Like, what is it? Let's do a deep dive and spend the next month trying to understand why I have a belief that I don't like math.
Right.
And it might take a month to get there, but the time's going to pass anyways. And once you narrow it and you nail it, the solution lives on the other side.
Yeah. I've been trying to attack the the problem, quote unquote, which I'm not seeing as a problem anymore. It's actually an adventure.
Opportunity.
It's an no, it's an
Yeah.
adventure. It's an adventure to explore and discover who this kid is. It's just changed it because, it's not, it's energetic and it's fun. And so this is what the thing is. I want to, again, turn this back around for the listener to go, this is what your life can be about. It can be about an exploration, a discovery, and that's where the adventure is. That's where the fun is. And so you stumbled across this aha moment with the cameras, finding the cameras in the person's house. They couldn't even see who they were until you took it, organized it, placed it in front of them on the wall, and they had an emotional reaction to it because it was like, oh my God, that's me, and I didn't even see it. You saw it. So what other ways are you finding to help people see who they are and what value they can actually really bring to the world?
Yes. You want to do a fun little exercise for your
Hell
listeners?
yeah.
Hell yeah. All right. So speaking of math, you know what a Venn diagram is? It's a circular where circles overlap. So let's imagine in your mind's eye, for those of you not watching the video, that there's a 4-circle Venn diagram. So you've got 4 circles crossing over. They overlap in the center, but they kind of ultimately make a square because of the way the 4 circles are positioned. So in the top left quadrant or circle, I want you to think about right into that circle the word innate. So this is your hard wiring. This is what you came into this body in this lifetime bearing in your gift set. So what are the innate qualities? So your strengths, if any of you have ever taken the Clifton Strengths Finder, your Colby, there's all those things that are like hardwired. Human design, if you've ever done that. So, and also think about your weaknesses and think about your quirks. And when I use the word weaknesses, you probably guessed this about me already. I don't think of them as a bad thing. I think of them as a necessary thing that were given to us in the gift set so that just like rumble strips on the freeway, when you're zinging down the fast lane and you start to fade out of your lane, you hit the rumble strips and it wakes you up to get you back in your lane. That's what I believe our weaknesses are. So that when we start to fade out of our lane, it's like, no, don't go over there. Get back in your lane. And yet so many of us, when we hit the rumble strips of our weaknesses, they're like, oh, well, I got to fix this. So then we have these strong weaknesses and now we're in this lane and we're weaving all along and we're actually not making the lightning fast progress we could if we just narrowed the lane and really be who we are. So innate. You look like you have a question.
Yeah. So I was just thinking about back to the story of Isla and her mathematics. So it could be, we don't know yet, but it could be that she isn't necessarily strong with mathematics. We know she doesn't care for mathematics. And after we do the exploration and I'll figure it out, blah, 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 blah. It doesn't make her heart sing. Mathematics doesn't make her heart sing, but creatively, like this kid will watch, like she'll have a Mariah Elizabeth and she's on YouTube and she's all about, she's the artistic, crafty person. So she'll have that going. At the same time, she's doing a totally different craft. She's always crafting and creating and coming up with ideas. That's like her joy. Once we figure out if we find out that math is say a weakness or a rumble strip,
and
let's figure out why, explore what's the limiting belief so it doesn't negatively impact the expression on her unique abilities that we want to expand on. So I guess coming back to it's like in my head, and this is for me, and that's what I'm talking to myself right now. Don't try and force Isla to be great at math just because I'm great at math, because it's not necessarily, it could be her rumble strip. It could be her rumble strip.
It could just be the application or the why. So if you talk about Mariah, the YouTuber, and you look at the number of subscribers and the analytics on YouTube, and you actually show her YouTube analytics, and you show her, oh, well, as a YouTuber, she makes this much in advertising. She makes this much in, and you start to show her the financials of running a YouTube business or a craft business. Then you can start to see, does she light up once it's in her zone? Yeah. Or is she still dead in the eyes and just wants to get through it? In which case, there's kind of two philosophies for parenting. There is, if your kid is not good at math, but brilliant at music, one school of thought says, get the kid a math tutor. The other says, get the kid a music tutor. I love the get the kid a music tutor. If you got to get a math tutor just to get enough to get by, whatever the minimum standard is, and then double down on the strengths. That's where I believe, because if she's going to be a world-class musician or crafter or whatever, yeah, she needs to know the basics of math to be able to do the parts of it that she may need to do for that side of her life. But her world-class ability, we want to figure out what that is and triple down, quadruple down, infinite down on that.
Love it. Okay.
So that's innate.
So and don't forget your 4 circles. We got our 4 circles. We're looking at innate is not only your innate ability, but it's your innate
factory settings,
quirks or
exactly quirks, weaknesses, strengths, all that stuff lives in innate. Second quadrant, top right, is learned. This is knowledge that you've acquired through study and self-study, but it's come from the source into your brain intellectually. So this is intellectual knowledge. So, if you went to accounting school, or people who, whatever, it could be underwater basket weaving, but you actually took a class or you read a book or you have knowledge that came here. The third quadrant, so if number 1 is innate, number 2 is learned, then number 3, bottom right, is experienced with an ED. This is your life story and especially your adversity. Because as much as success is awesome and feels really, really good, all of the magic of the learning happens embedded in a steaming mound of horse manure. Because that's really where the greatest learnings happen, right? So, because there's things that we know intellectually, quadrant 2, but there's things we've learned that we now know, which is quadrant 3. And then quadrant 4 is desire and calling. So you can almost think of there being a dotted line that divides the 2 sides of the quadrant vertically. Mm-hmm. So the 2 circles on the left, which is innate and desire and calling, that's the inner game. And then the outer game are the 2 on the right, which is knowledge and experience. And so desire and calling is innate, in that it's hardwired and it's planted there, but it's not something you know and understand to be true. So your giftings, your strengths, and your weaknesses, you know about those things. But your desire and calling is something that is like planted. This is part of the treasure map that I was saying, that God, universe, source, spirit, whatever you call it, has left you these little clues. So desire and calling is something that you feel pulled towards, but it doesn't always make sense to you in your mind. For example, I grew up in a really blue collar, I'm going to just call it what it is without mentioning names of towns, like really small-minded. I'm painting with a broad brush, but small-minded is the only way I can think to describe it. And so growing up, had this like call and desire and like this deep calling toward luxury, like world-class 5-star luxury, like 4 Seasons, Ritz-Carlton. And it never made any sense because I had no exposure to that. And it wouldn't go away. But I kept stuffing it down and pushing it away because I didn't understand it. This is, again, when you bring curiosity and adventure to the table, and you start to explore it. The minute that I allowed myself to go there and I explored it for the first time, it was like a Mack truck hit me. I was like, oh my gosh, as an entrepreneur, I'm trying to teach my team and train them on world-class white glove service. How can I do that if I've never experienced it myself? And so now so much of what I do in the world relates to customer experience. And it's because I've had this incredible following, this desire and calling, that I've been able to have some of the highest and best unforgettable life experiences and witness what that customer experience is, to then be able to bring that back and apply it into my own lives and businesses and with my team, etc. So sometimes you'll scratch your head like, why do I feel so drawn to that? It doesn't make sense. Don't worry about it. It's been put in there for a reason. Just follow it. Because on the other side of that, there's magic.
I love the concept of the treasure hunt. Like that, there's all these hidden clues, and that the creator has basically infused all these clues in your entire life. So in the inner life and the outer life, like everywhere there's clues. I had this kind of aha moment the other day where I thought, I thought to myself, and I went, the creator's talking to me all the time. I'm experiencing the creator constantly. It's the whole experience is experiencing the creator. And I jokingly said, it's Allah, Buddha, Brahma, baby Jesus. Doesn't matter what you call it.
Exactly.
My experience is it doesn't matter. I know that if if you use the word God or Allah or, these kind of traditional religious words, it can come up kind of a internal pushback from people. They're like, oh, I don't want to know you're talking God, you're talking this. But
exactly.
when you just kind of go, there's an underlying spirit, that an energy, the force, the Star Wars.
The Grand Master. Have I told you my chess divine download that I got? Oh my gosh. You and the listeners will love this. So in a meditation, I got a divine download that source, God, whatever you're calling it, is we're playing a game of chess. So the board is in the center, we're on one side, and the Grand Master is on the other. Now, when you're playing with the Grand Master, you're playing with, you're not playing against. Because here's the thing, going back to the why, the Grand Master wants us to become Grand Masters at this thing called life. That's the goal, right? So if the Grand Master is teaching us to become Grand Masters, well, there's going to be moves that we make on our side of the board. That's our free will. And then there's going to be moves that we think are happening to us, but really they're happening for us. And when the move comes on that side of the board, we're like, I did not see that coming. And if we think that life is happening for us and we remember what it's all about, which is to become Grand Masters, then we're quick to be able to breathe into whatever's just happened. And in the words of Viktor Frankl, between stimulus and response, there's a pause, right? To be able to pause, to hold space, to not attach judgment, and to see how whatever has happened to us, even when it's so hard and a loved one has died, or we've been dumped, or things just haven't gone our way. It's hard not to react. Yet that's part of the training of Grandmaster training, is to be able to hold space and not react, to be able to be present, to be able to be paying attention to all the nuances of that experience, to then be able to see the gift inside of it that is what will make us one step closer to being Grandmasters ourselves.
Which is the treasure hunt. Like that's the thing, is like it becomes more energetic and joyful and fun. Like it's a game we're playing. We're trying to, we're playing a game. We're playing the treasure hunt. And where is it? And you start finding clues here and dropping here and there and here and there. So your framework here simplifies, like a simplified framework, to think of the inner and the outer. And so 4 circles, we've got innate, learned, experienced, and desire. And then
desire and calling. Because sometimes we have a calling that we also don't understand beyond just desire.
And the other thing I just wanted to point out too, you said underwater basket weaving. Are we the only two people in the world that know about that course? Because I've always
Oh,
talked about that. I always said that. They said, "Oh, so what are you doing at university?" And I was like, "Oh, well, I'm taking economics and psychology, and of course, I've got my electives." "Oh, what are you taking for elective?" "Oh, underwater basket weaving." And they look at me. You're the only other person I've ever heard say that. Like,
must be your Canadian roots are
oh,
shining
no
through or
kidding. It's like,
something.
I'm taking I'm taking advanced underwater basket weaving. We don't use it. We don't use a scuba suit. Yeah.
You know,
You have to hold your breath.
sometimes we don't realize the things we say until others shine the mirror. And yes, I've had a number of where I've used words like the back 40 to describe things too. And people are like, internationally, feel like, what are you even talking about? Yet
Yeah.
somehow to our people who share the roots, it all
Yeah.
makes sense. So
Yeah.
apologize for any and all of those that we've had today.
I like that. So these things, all these four circles, and I've been writing it down. And for the listener and the watchers of this, I would highly recommend you do this. It's like circle these down and look at it. So now these circles are overlapping in multiple different ways. Like there's
What's beautiful is where they all cross over, the convergence
yeah,
of the four circles in the sweet spot of the center.
yes,
Now we have this amazing thing called Chat GPT or AI, because guess what you can do? Please, before you do any of this, go into your settings, even in the free version of Chat GPT, and turn off that it can, and to tell it cannot use your information to train. So just make sure you've got that radio button set so that it won't use your information on the World Wide Web. And it's a private conversation. And then you can tell it, these are my innate strengths. These are my giftings. This is my knowledge that I've acquired. These are the life experiences and adversity that have taught me lots of different things. These are the desire and callings of my heart. Now, what I'm trying to do is package all those things together to determine what I'm here to do on the planet. And it's going to riff with you and help you. And if you then add things like your date of birth, your astrological sign, if you've done StrengthsFinder or Print or Colby, you can upload your report. And now all of a sudden it's taking everything in that thread into account to help you solve some of these questions that are elusive to you. I mean, coaching is obviously brilliant for this because they ask great questions that help draw things out of you. But it's amazing in the modern day how you can put it all together to work with your GPT. Because you can't, just like Steve Jobs talks about in that brilliant commencement address he did at Stanford, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only look at them, connecting them in reverse. So Buckminster Fuller, Bucky Fuller, has this concept called precession, Precession. And he essentially says that your purpose on the planet, which is kind of that sweet spot in the middle of those four, is, he says, at a 90-degree angle to your bliss. But let's throw out the 90-degree angles because you know that math isn't my favorite thing. And let's just focus on the example that he used, which is of bees. So he talks about how a bee is hardwired with desire and calling to go forth and drink the nectar from the flowers. The bee is also physiologically, innately equipped with the right equipment to do the job. And it's learned kind of how to do that through observation or however bees learn to do what they do. And then it's done some trial and error for which ones are the best ones for it. So it's gone through all four of those. Yet the bee, its purpose on the planet is cross-pollination. But by it following its bliss, the desire and calling, and using its giftings to go forth and have this blissful experience just going from flower to flower, it's ultimately achieving its purpose. But it wouldn't know that that's its purpose until later down the line when the threads all come together, that the pollen on its little feet that went from one flower now to the other flower, it's actually saving the world. Yet it's just having a good time doing what it's doing. So that's why when people go looking for their purpose, it's so hard. So just focus on the four circles and going forth and doing what you've been built to do, having a great time, and it's going to show you what your purpose is.
I
You're
remember.
unlocking something.
I,
I
I,
love
I am.
watching
Yeah,
this. I
yeah.
love watching this. It's so fun.
We had talked about this before, and now I'm remembering that part of the conversation was the analogy of the bee. The bee, I think the bee never really truly knows that its purpose is actually to cross pollinate, because it doesn't see the bigger picture. Like, and that's, as humans, we don't see everything. We don't see the whole picture. We don't see everything. I had Stell on the podcast, and he was talking
Love
about,
him.
oh, he's fantastic. And he was talking about the absolute minuscule amount that we actually process through our vision, through our sight.
Right.
He sees there's so many bits of information coming at us, and we disseminate it down, we compartmentalize. And from a psychology perspective, which I've done lots of studying on that, I've got a degree in psychology, it's broken all those things down. We only hold a small piece. You don't see the whole picture. And this is the thing about life, is that if you can hold on to that thought that I am going to take my innate abilities and what I've learned and acquired so far and my life experience and what's driving me inside, and keep going forward and exploring that, the act of exploring, I will discover bits and pieces of the breadcrumbs and the treasure hunt, but I may or may not ever see the ultimate purpose for me being on the planet, because the pollinating of the plants and to survive, have the whole ecosystem survive, is beyond my comprehension. But knowing how we are above the beast, seeing what's going on with that, thinking of the creator being above us and saying, look, I can see what's happening. It's gorgeous. It's beautiful. Keep doing what you're doing. And I will maybe unlock a little bit more for you. And maybe one day we'll see the whole picture. I don't know. But isn't that part of the fun, is not knowing, right?
And that's the importance of courage. So remembering that courage, when you look at the word, the root of it is cor, C-O-U-R, which is Latin for heart. Having the courage and the heart to go deep into being unabashedly who we are. Having the courage to, when we can see the seasons of our lives changing, having the courage to align our life to what we can see and feel that's changing within us. That is when I was talking earlier at the beginning, diving deeper and deeper to be more authentically raw and real with who you are. Having the courage to do that just puts the whole video game on fast track.
I was having this conversation earlier today with a friend of mine, and I think there's something that I just really want to share with the listeners here, is that there's a line, though, between self-exploration and finding your purpose and becoming more you, and it can cross a line of narcissism, and where you are actually being more self-centered. So, there's a lot of talk about, oh, go follow your bliss, do your own thing, blah, blah. But it can be abused to the point of narcissism, where it becomes me, myself, and I, the disease of the ego. I talk about it without
purpose. Yes.
With recovering alcoholic it's a disease of the ego. You don't see the damage you're doing because you're doing this self-centered living style. That's not what we're talking about here. The thing that we're talking about is finding out your purpose, and that intersection of those four circles is, once you unlock that, your expression of who you are only helps others grow and increases others' freedoms and serves other people. It's not harmful. So it's not a self-centeredness, but a self-exploration that actually benefits everybody, as opposed to a self-centeredness, which can cause destruction.
Right. So it's only the self-serving while you're trying to figure it out. And it's a lifelong game. You'll always be figuring it out, because new things happen that create contrast, that then we're like, oh, this unravels a whole new piece. But when you're going into discovery, it's to figure out how to use that. And that's the part where it changes from narcissism, which is just blindly doing it without any use or purpose besides self-serving, to then being able to use it. So Oftentimes, I'll ask people what I call Krista's 3 critical questions, which is number 1, what life do you want to lead? Number 2, what business do you want to be in? And again, it's not about being a business owner, because if you want to be the best parent that you can possibly be, then being the best parent, that's the business you want to be in. But question number 3 is what we're talking about here, which is who do you want to serve? And you've heard me say this, but maybe your listeners haven't, that I believe that our ideal target audience is a former version of ourselves. So if we think back to the struggling versions of ourselves, that's what we're trying to do. We're doing a deep dive to figure out who we are, to create solutions that's going to help our fellow human, who's the struggling version of who we were, get out of where they are to get busy living the life that they were created to live. So yes, when used in service, that becomes, again, your secret weapon, because not only have you conquered what the struggling you has conquered, but you've done it in a very unique way that allows you to share that with the world in hopes that other people are empowered to do the same.
And I had that huge aha moment get unlocked when I did the scorecard on the Viking Academy. So on the website, I have a Viking score. So people can go on and they can get their Viking scorecard and figure out where their Viking score lands. And you know the mindset scorecard, so you know what I'm talking about. And they have 4 kind of sections to it, which is like failure, frustrated, traditionally successful, and then transformative. And if I go back and I look at all of those mindsets in those 4 quadrants, they've all been versions of me at some part of my life, but I've been moving towards wanting to be in the transformative space. That's who I am drawn and called to be, is that person that's looking for transformation and growth and exploration, right? That inner Viking, it just, let's go explore. Let's have fun with this. But all the other sections are all versions of Eric at some point.
Exactly. And you create, like, by living and has, especially quadrant 3, the experienced life experience, especially adversity, you actually have a map that you can hand to somebody who's going through whatever you went through. So whether it's me as an athlete, when I had a career-ending injury, how do you put yourself back together after that? Well, that led to all these different things, including personal branding. And your life becomes this work of art that is a tapestry of service to humanity, yet all born from the life you've lived. So it's also your legacy.
Pain is the touchstone of all growth. Pain is the touchstone. And you and I've talked about this in your
Totally.
injury that you had, and the crash of my accounting firm, or my partnership that I had, my alcoholism, my experience with my family members, all these painful experiences I understand now weren't happening to me. They were happening for me, so that I can take them and transform them and then share it with the past version of myself.
Correct.
And then once
Who
you
desperately needs the roadmap from
Yes.
you for how to transform themselves.
And when you see others as yourself, you're actually seeing creation for what it actually is. So once you,
And then our life is filled with meaning.
yes. Tammy Grantham was one of the guests, and she's my soul guide. I got a session with her later today, actually, and she takes me all sorts of amazing places. One of the things she's always said to me is, every person we meet is a past, present, or higher version of ourselves. And so she said, every person we meet and we're talking to, there could be parts of that person that are in the past or in the present or in the higher. And so when you start looking at the world through that, I've found that when I look at the world through that lens, I don't see a scary, mean, menacing world. I see a reflection of me in everybody. And I've had a few of those moments where all of a sudden that download goes, whoa. And I see everything is me, not in an egoic way, but in a reflective way where it's like, oh, this is all me. And all of a sudden there's this peace that flows over me. And I'm like, I'm no longer scared and afraid and alone, even though it's very quiet, and it's very quiet. Do you know what I mean? There's this peace that
Exactly.
a peace that passeth all understanding. It just
Yes.
flows right down. Yeah.
Exactly. It's magic. And if you think of the life as an infinity loop, where sometimes we're giving value and sometimes we're receiving value, if it's the past, the present, or the future best self or higher self, then the past you're giving and some of the present, and then the future you're receiving and learning from that person. And so it creates this harmonious yin yang of delight.
And then in a constant, and the one quote I love from Krishnamurti, it's like a mind that is constantly learning can never be hurt. You're constantly learning, constantly growing. Because I remember hearing that phrase from Dan specifically in one of his books. He says, it's a life, always be growing, always be growing, always be growing. I wasn't in the right mindset when I first read it. And I was like, oh, that seems like a lot of fucking work. And then I was like, now it's not work. That's the fun. It's not growing to get somewhere. Happiness doesn't come from obtaining things. It's found through the pursuit of a goal worth aiming for. And if a goal, the ultimate goal worth aiming for in my mind right now is figuring out who I am and why I was put here so that I can be consciously part of the unfolding. And that's what I want for the listeners and the members of the Viking Academy. That's what we do. That's the whole purpose of it. That's the whole purpose of the Viking Academy.
Well, it was my privilege and honor to be here with you in service of them and this unfolding, never-ending transformation journey that we're all on. Thank you.
Krista, thank you so much for being on the podcast. If anybody wants to find out more, you can go to KristaClive-Smith.com and see what she's up to there. This has been a fantastic conversation. We're going to have to do it again. I'm sure we will.
My privilege and honor. Anytime. I adore you and everything you're up to and creating in the world. It's so great.
Thank you. Keep exploring, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the Viking Academy podcast. Make sure to leave us your honest feedback by leaving a review on Apple or Spotify and hit subscribe so you never miss an episode.